The reservation was for 7:30 p.m. at Meridian, the most exclusive restaurant in the downtown district. Mom had specifically requested this place for her 55th birthday celebration because, as she'd explained to everyone who would listen, only the most successful people can afford to dine there regularly. I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple navy dress that I'd owned for 3 years. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention or give my family any reason to comment on my poor financial choices. I'd learned over the years that blending into the background was easier than defending lifestyle decisions they would never understand. The hostess, Maria, greeted me with a warm smile. "Good evening, Ms. Rodriguez. Your family is already seated at table 12. I thanked her and made my way through the elegantly appointed dining room, past tables of well-dressed professionals and couples celebrating special occasions. The soft lighting from crystal chandeliers cast everything in a golden glow, and the quiet murmur of sophisticated conversation created exactly the ambience Mom loved to be associated with. Table 12 was a prime spot near the windows overlooking the city skyline. My family was already there. Mom, resplendent in a burgundy silk dress that had probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Dad, distinguished as always in his perfectly tailored suit. My older brother Carlos, wearing his success-like cologne, expensive and impossible to ignore. And his wife Jennifer, whose jewelry collection seemed to grow more impressive at every family gathering. Isabella. Mom's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted to seem delighted but was actually calculating how my appearance might reflect on the family. "You're here." I kissed her cheek and took the remaining seat at the round table. "Happy birthday, Mom. You look beautiful." "Thank you, darling. Though I do wish you'd made more of an effort. This is Meridian, not some casual bistro." The criticism was delivered with a smile, the way Mom had perfected over the years. Sharp enough to sting, gentle enough to seem like loving concern. Carlos leaned back in his chair, already nursing what looked like his second scotch. "Bella's always been more comfortable with simpler things." "Nothing wrong with that." The condescension in his voice was familiar. Carlos had graduated from Wharton, landed a position at a prestigious investment firm and married well. In our family's economy of worth, he was the clear winner, while I was the cautionary tale. "How's the job search going, Isabella?" Jennifer asked, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Still trying to make that freelance thing work?" Before I could answer, Dad jumped in. "She's not looking for a real job, Jennifer. Isabella prefers her consulting work." He made air quotes around the word consulting as if my business were an elaborate game of pretend. The waiter approached our table and I recognized him immediately. Michael had been working the evening shift for about 8 months, and he was one of the most professional servers I'd ever encountered. "Good evening," he said with a practiced smile. "Can I start you off with some drinks this evening?" As the family ordered their cocktails, premium brands naturally, I caught Michael's eye and gave him an almost imperceptible nod. He returned it with the slightest smile before taking my order for sparkling water. "Just water." Mom's voice sharpened. "Isabella, this is a celebration. Surely you can afford one drink." The implication hung in the air like expensive perfume. I couldn't afford to drink at Meridian. I was the family member who had to watch her budget while everyone else enjoyed the finer things. "I'm driving tonight, Mom." "Oh right. That little car of yours. I keep forgetting you don't have a driver like Carlos." Carlos raised his glass in a mock toast. "To Isabella's Honda Civic. May it continue to get her from point A to point B." They all laughed, the kind of gentle family teasing that would seem harmless to an outsider but carried years of accumulated judgment. My modest car, my simple clothes, my small apartment, my unconventional career. Every choice I'd made was treated as evidence of my failure to thrive in the way they understood success. Throughout the appetizer course, the conversation followed its usual pattern. Carlos talked about his latest client acquisition, Jennifer shared gossip from her charity board meetings, Dad discussed his law firm's recent high-profile case, and Mom held court like the queen she believed herself to be. I listened, contributed when directly addressed, and quietly observed the restaurant around us. The evening service was running smoothly, the kitchen was executing perfectly timed courses, and the staff was providing the level of service that justified Meridian's reputation as the finest dining establishment in the city. It should have made me proud. Instead, I felt the familiar heaviness that came with these family gatherings, where my accomplishments were invisible and my worth was measured by standards that had nothing to do with who I actually was. The main course arrived, and with it Mom's third glass of wine. She was feeling expansive now, ready to hold forth on whatever topic struck her fancy. Unfortunately, tonight's topic seemed to be me. "You know," she said, her voice carrying to nearby tables, "I was talking to Margaret Patterson yesterday. You remember Margaret, Carlos? She's on the hospital board with me, and she was asking about Isabella." I felt my stomach tighten. Nothing good ever came from Mom's conversations with Margaret Patterson. Margaret's daughter just made partner at her law firm. 32 years old, partner at Morrison Klein and Associates. Can you imagine? And Margaret asked about Isabella's career, and honestly, I didn't know what to say. The table went quiet. Even Carlos looked uncomfortable with where this might be heading. I mean, what do you tell people when they ask what your daughter does for a living? "Oh, she does some sort of computer work from her apartment." It's embarrassing. "Mom," I said quietly, "maybe we could discuss this later?" "No, I think this needs to be said. You're 30 years old, Isabella. 30. Margaret's daughter is making 6 figures, living in a beautiful home, engaged to a successful doctor. And you're, what? Playing around on your laptop, pretending to run a business." The nearby tables were starting to notice the tension. I could see other diners glancing our way, picking up on the family drama unfolding over their elegant meal. "Patricia," Dad said, his voice carrying a warning tone. "Don't, Patricia, me Roberto. Someone needs to tell her the truth. Isabella, you're wasting your life. You're wasting your potential. You have a college degree, you're intelligent, you're presentable when you make an effort. There's no reason you should be struggling the way you are." "I'm not struggling, Mom." "Oh, please. You live in that tiny apartment, you drive a car that's older than some of the servers here, you dress like you shop at discount stores. If that's not struggling, what is?" Carlos shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mom, maybe we should focus on celebrating your birthday." But Mom was on a roll now, fueled by wine and years of frustration with her youngest daughter's refusal to conform to her vision of success. "No, Carlos, this needs to be said. Isabella, you're 30 years old and you have nothing to show for it. Nothing. No career, no husband, no prospects, no direction. Just this fantasy that you're some kind of entrepreneur when you're really just unemployed with a laptop." The words hit like physical blows. Every fear I'd ever had about not being good enough, every moment of self-doubt, every question about whether I was fooling myself about my abilities, Mom had just voiced all of them in front of a restaurant full of strangers. "And the worst part," she continued, her voice rising, "is that you seem content with it. You seem to think this is fine. Well, let me tell you something, Isabella Rodriguez. This is not fine. Living paycheck to paycheck is not fine. Having no savings is not fine. Being unable to afford a decent dress for your mother's birthday dinner is not fine." I could feel tears threatening, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of all these people, not on Mom's birthday. You want to know what I tell people like Margaret Patterson when they ask about my daughter? I tell them that Isabella is still finding herself. That she's exploring her options. That she's taking her time to figure out what she wants to do with her life. Do you know how humiliating that is for me? Do you know what people think when I have to make excuses for my 30-year-old daughter who still lives like a college student? The entire restaurant seemed to have gone quiet. Even the background music felt muted compared to Mom's voice carrying across the dining room. "The truth is, Isabella, you'll never amount to anything. You don't have the drive, you don't have the ambition, you don't have what it takes to succeed in the real world. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the eyes of strangers on me, could sense the mixture of pity and discomfort radiating from nearby tables. Mom had just publicly eviscerated her own daughter at her birthday celebration, and everyone in the restaurant had witnessed it. I took a sip of my sparkling water and smiled. "Are you finished, Mom?" She looked startled by my calm response. "Isabella, I'm trying to help you understand." "No, you're trying to make yourself feel better by tearing me down in public. There's a difference." Before she could respond, I saw Marcus, the head of security, approaching our table. Marcus was a former police officer who took his job seriously, and he looked concerned about the disturbance we were causing. He walked directly to my chair and leaned down slightly, his voice professional but quiet enough that only our table could hear. "Boss, is everything all right here? Should I escort these people out?" The world stopped. Mom's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Dad's fork clattered against his plate. Carlos stared at Marcus like he'd suddenly started speaking in tongues. Jennifer's mouth actually fell open. "Boss." Mom's voice was barely a whisper. I looked up at Marcus with the same calm smile I'd been wearing all evening. "Thank you, Marcus, but that won't be necessary. This is my family. We're just having a conversation." "If you're sure," he said, though his eyes remained concerned. "If you need anything at all, just let me know." "I will. Thank you." Marcus nodded and walked away, leaving my family staring at me like I'd just performed a magic trick. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Dad found his voice. "Isabella," he said slowly, "did that man just call you boss?" I took another sip of water, considering how to respond. The secret I'd been keeping for 3 years was now sitting on the table like an uninvited guest, impossible to ignore. "He did. But why would he?" Mom's voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. "Because I own this restaurant, Mom. I own this building. I own half the commercial real estate in this downtown district." If the restaurant had been quiet before, it was now completely silent. Even the kitchen seemed to have paused its activity. Carlos was shaking his head. "That's not possible. You can't." "I bought Meridian 2 years ago," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "Along with the office building next door, the boutique hotel across the street, and the shopping complex on Fifth Avenue. My computer work is property management and real estate investment. My little consulting business has generated approximately $68 million in assets over the past 5 years." Mom set her wine glass down with trembling hands. "$68 million? Give or take a few million, depending on current market valuations." Jennifer was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown wings. "But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car." "Because I choose to live below my means. Because I'd rather invest my profits than spend them on status symbols to impress people whose opinions don't actually matter to me." The weight of that statement settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Dad leaned back in his chair, his legal mind trying to process this new information. "Isabella, if this is true..." "It's true, Dad. Every word." "Then why didn't you ever tell us? Why let us think you were struggling?" I looked around the table at the faces of people I loved deeply but who had never really seen me. "Because you never asked, Dad. You decided what my life looked like based on surface appearances, and you never bothered to dig deeper. You assumed that because I lived simply I must be poor. You assumed that because I worked from home I must not have a real business. You assumed that because I didn't follow your path to success, I must be failing." Carlos was still shaking his head in disbelief. "But Bella, this is insane. You're saying you're worth..." "What?" $68 million. The portfolio is worth $68 million. My personal net worth is approximately $43 million after debt service and operating expenses. The numbers hung in the air like smoke. $43 million. More money than anyone at this table had ever imagined I might possess. "And you let us..." Mom's voice cracked. "You let us treat you like you were a failure. I let you reveal who you really are when you think someone is beneath you." That statement hit the table like a physical blow. The truth of it was undeniable. They had all treated me differently because they believed I was less successful, less worthy, less important than they were. Michael, our waiter, appeared at the table looking nervous. He'd probably been sent over by the manager to check on the situation. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said quietly, "is everything all right? The other guests are starting to ask questions about the disturbance." The formal use of my last name in front of my family was another small confirmation of what I'd just revealed. The staff knew who I was, knew who signed their paychecks, knew that the woman my family had been publicly humiliating was actually their employer. "Everything's fine, Michael. Please give my apologies to the other diners for the disruption. Perhaps we could have some coffee for the table?" "Of course, Ms. Rodriguez. Right away." As Michael walked away, Jennifer found her voice. "Isabella, I don't understand. If you have all this money, why do you live the way you live? Why not buy a mansion? Why not drive a luxury car? Why not dress like you can afford designer clothes?" It was a fair question and one I'd been asking myself for years. Because I learned something important when I started building wealth, Jennifer. I learned that the people who love you for who you are will love you regardless of what you own. And the people who only respect you because of what you can afford, well, those people aren't worth impressing. Mom was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks and ruining her carefully applied makeup. Isabella, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. The things I said tonight. The things I've said over the years. You said them because you thought you could. Because you thought I was weak, unsuccessful, and dependent on your approval for my sense of self-worth. But you're not, Dad said quietly. You're stronger than any of us. You built something incredible while we were busy judging you for not following our path. Carlos was still struggling to accept the reality of the situation. Bella, this doesn't make sense. How did you get the capital to start buying real estate? How did you learn about property management? How did you do any of this without us knowing? I smiled at my brother, remembering the kid who used to help me with math homework and teach me to ride a bike. I started small, Carlos. I saved every penny I earned from freelance consulting work. The same work you all dismissed as playing on the computer. I bought a foreclosed duplex for $30,000, lived in one unit and rented out the other. The rental income covered my mortgage and gave me a small profit. The table was completely focused now, everyone listening intently to understand how their assumptions had been so completely wrong. I used the equity from that duplex to buy another property, then another. I reinvested every dollar of profit, lived below my means and kept expanding the portfolio. 5 years ago, I formed Rodriguez Properties LLC and started acquiring commercial real estate. But the research, the market analysis, the legal work. Dad's lawyer mind was trying to grasp the complexity of what I'd accomplished. I learned it all, Dad. I read everything I could find, took online courses, networked with other investors, made mistakes and learned from them. The same way you built your law practice, the same way Carlos built his client base. Hard work, smart decisions, and persistence. Mom wiped her eyes with her napkin. And we spent all this time feeling sorry for you. While I spent all this time feeling sorry for myself because I thought my family had no faith in me. The coffee arrived and we sat in silence for several minutes, each of us processing the complete transformation of our family dynamic that had just occurred. Finally, Carlos spoke up. Bella, can I ask you something? Of course. Why reveal this now? Why tonight? You could have kept this secret indefinitely. I considered the question carefully. Because I realized that hiding who I am to protect your feelings was actually enabling your worst instincts. You treated me badly because you thought you could. You dismissed my work because you thought it didn't matter. You made assumptions about my worth because you thought I couldn't challenge them. I paused, looking around the table at each of them. I love all of you deeply. But I couldn't love myself while pretending to be someone I'm not for your comfort. Mom reached across the table and took my hand. Isabella, can you forgive us? Can you forgive me for the horrible things I said tonight? Mom, there's nothing to forgive. You were operating with incomplete information and assumptions that seemed reasonable based on what you could see. But now you have complete information. The question is what you do with it. Dad leaned forward, his expression serious. What do you mean? I mean that knowing the truth about my financial situation doesn't automatically fix the underlying problem. The problem wasn't that you thought I was poor. The problem was that you treated me differently because you thought I was poor. The insight hung in the air, challenging each of them to examine their own values and prejudices. Jennifer spoke up hesitantly. Isabella, what can we do? How can we make this right? You can start by understanding that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank account, their car, their clothes, or their career path. You can start by showing the same respect to everyone, regardless of their apparent financial status. You can start by asking questions instead of making assumptions. Carlos nodded slowly. And maybe we can start by getting to know our sister for who she actually is instead of who we thought she was. The rest of the evening was spent in very different conversation. They asked about my properties, my investment strategy, my long-term plans. They listened, really listened, when I explained my business philosophy, my approach to tenant relations, my thoughts on market trends. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to my family as an equal rather than as a disappointment they were trying to fix. As we prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside. Isabella, I need you to know something. Tonight was the most ashamed I've ever been in my life. Mom, you don't need to. Yes, I do. I was ashamed, but not of you. I was ashamed of myself. Ashamed that I raised a daughter strong enough to build an empire in silence while her own family tore her down. Ashamed that I valued appearances more than character. Ashamed that I cared more about what Margaret Patterson thought than about what my own daughter had accomplished. She paused, choosing her words carefully. You handled tonight with grace and dignity that I don't deserve. You could have humiliated us. You could have thrown us out of your restaurant. Instead, you used this moment to teach us something about love, about respect, about the difference between punishment and education. I hugged her then, feeling forgiveness and understanding pass between us. I love you, Mom. I've always loved you. I just needed you to see me for who I really am. I see you now, Mija. And I'm so proud of the woman you've become. As I drove home in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, I reflected on the evening's events. The revelation had been dramatic, but the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding trust and respect in family relationships takes time, patience, and commitment from everyone involved. My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. Proud to be your brother. Sorry it took me so long to say that. Then one from Dad. Thank you for teaching us what success really looks like. And finally one from Mom. You are extraordinary and I should have seen that years ago. I smiled, pulling into the parking lot of my modest apartment building. Tomorrow I would wake up in the same small space I'd called home for 5 years, the same space I'd lived in while building a real estate empire worth tens of millions of dollars. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to let other people's definitions of success change who you are. Sometimes the greatest victory is being secure enough in your accomplishments that you don't need to display them for validation. But when family finally sees you for who you really are, that's not just success. That's everything. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Word had apparently spread through my family's social circle about the restaurant revelation, and suddenly everyone wanted to reconnect with Roberto and Patricia Rodriguez's successful daughter. Margaret Patterson called to congratulate my mother on having such an accomplished child. The same Margaret Patterson who had been used as an example of proper parenting the night before. My phone rang as I was reviewing morning market reports. It was Mom. Isabella, I hope I'm not calling too early. It's fine, Mom. What's up? I wanted to talk to you about something. Your father and I have been discussing last night, and we realize we have a lot of work to do to repair our relationship with you. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, we do. We were terrible parents to you, Isabella. We were so focused on what we thought success should look like that we completely missed what success actually looked like in your life. She paused and I could hear the emotion in her voice. I want to make this right. I want to understand your work, your business, your life. Not because you're wealthy, though I admit that's opened my eyes, but because you're my daughter and I should have been interested all along. What did you have in mind? Would you be willing to show me one of your properties? Would you let me see what you've built? I want to understand who you really are. That afternoon, I picked up Mom in my Honda Civic and drove her to the Meridian building. We started in the basement parking garage and worked our way up through the commercial spaces, the restaurant itself, and finally to the top floor executive offices. At each level, I explained the business model, the renovation decisions, the tenant relationships, the financial performance. Mom listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes in a small notebook she'd brought along. Isabella, she said as we stood on the rooftop terrace overlooking the city, this is incredible. You've created something beautiful and profitable and meaningful. These aren't just investments, they're contributions to the community. That was always the goal, Mom. I wanted to build something that would last, something that would provide value to tenants and customers, something that would improve the neighborhoods where I invested. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the skyline. Your father and I raised you to be independent, to be strong, to think for yourself. But then when you actually did those things, when you chose a path we didn't understand, we tried to make you doubt yourself. You were protecting me the only way you knew how, Mom. You thought my choices were risky and you wanted me to be secure. But we were wrong about what security looks like, weren't we? Real security isn't having a traditional job or fitting into conventional expectations. Real security is having the skills and confidence to create your own path. Over the following months, my relationship with my family transformed completely. Dad started consulting me on real estate matters for his law firm's clients. Carlos asked for advice on his own investment portfolio. Jennifer began attending real estate investment seminars and reading market analysis reports. Most importantly, they stopped treating me like their unsuccessful younger family member and started treating me like the accomplished businesswoman I'd become. The change wasn't just in how they saw me, it was in how they saw success itself. They began to understand that wealth could be built quietly, that achievement didn't always require public recognition, and that their daughter's modest lifestyle had been a choice, not a limitation. 6 months later, we celebrated Mom's 56th birthday at Meridian again. This time, when she introduced me to other guests, it was as, "My daughter Isabella, the real estate investor who owns this building." But more importantly, the conversation at our family table was completely different. Instead of dismissing my work, they asked about my latest acquisitions. Instead of criticizing my lifestyle choices, they expressed admiration for my discipline and focus. Instead of treating me like a disappointment, they celebrated my achievements. During dessert, Mom stood up to make a toast. "Last year at my birthday dinner, I said some terrible things about my daughter Isabella. I questioned her choices, her ambitions, her worth. I was wrong about everything." She looked directly at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Isabella, you are everything I hoped you would become and more. You're successful, but more importantly, you're kind. You're wealthy, but more importantly, you're wise. You're independent, but more importantly, you're loving." She raised her glass. "To Isabella, who taught our family that success comes in many forms, that love should be unconditional, and that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones who surprise us most." As everyone at the table raised their glasses, Marcus approached from the security station. "Excuse me, Ms. Rodriguez," he said with a smile, "but the kitchen asked me to tell you that tonight's celebration is on the house. Happy birthday to your mother." Mom looked around the elegant restaurant, her daughter's restaurant, and shook her head in amazement. "I'm still getting used to this," she said with a laugh. "Getting used to what, Mom?" "Getting used to the fact that my daughter owns half of downtown and I never knew it." "Not half, Mom. About 15%. But I'm working on it." The laughter that followed was genuine, warm, and free of the tension that had characterized our family gatherings for years. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey from that painful birthday dinner to this moment of genuine family connection. The $68 million real estate portfolio had been satisfying to build, but the relationships I'd rebuilt were worth infinitely more. My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Thanks for not giving up on us even when we gave up on you." Then one from Dad. "Proud of you every day, not just the days when we remember to say it." And finally one from Mom. "You are the best part of your father and me combined, and I promise to never forget that again." I smiled, pulling into my apartment complex parking lot. The same modest building I'd lived in throughout my entire real estate empire journey. Some of my commercial tenants occupied more luxurious spaces, but this little place would always be home. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is succeed on your own terms, regardless of whether others recognize or understand your achievements. Sometimes the greatest victory is being secure enough in your accomplishments that you don't need external validation to feel worthy. But when family finally sees you for who you really are, celebrates your victories and supports your dreams, that transforms everything. That's not just success. That's love in its truest form.